Okay, let's unpack this. The surprisingly long and, well, winding journey of meditation.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah, you might picture someone sitting cross-legged, humming Om, and look, while that's maybe part of the story somewhere, it's just a tiny fraction of something way, way bigger.
Absolutely.
So today on the deep dive, we're diving in. We're tracing the evolution of meditation from its ancient spiritual birthplaces right up to its current status as this truly global thing.
Influencing pretty much everything.
Right. Personal well-being, major institutions. We've looked at, academic papers, historical accounts, even checked out some organizational websites.
Trying to piece together the full picture.
Exactly. To bring you the most insightful bits about this really pervasive practice, forget the quick fix cliches.
Yeah, this isn't just about, 5 minutes of calm.
No, it's about understanding something that has profoundly shaped cultures for, well, millennia, and now it's popping up in schools, hospitals, boardrooms, everywhere.
It's quite the transformation.
So have you ever stopped to consider just how deep these roots go and, why this ancient practice resonates so powerfully today?
Well, it's fascinating when you start digging. We could be talking about a history stretching back maybe 7,000 years?
7,000. Really?
Potentially. Archaeological digs in the Indus Valley, they date back as far as 5,000 to 3,500 BCE.
Wow.
And they've unearthed these depictions, figures in what really look like meditative postures.
So actual physical evidence from that long ago.
It seems like it. It gives us this very early glimpse into practices that, well, they bear resemblance to what we think of as meditation today.
Suggesting a pretty deep-seated human interest in, focused awareness.
Something like that, yeah. A fundamental drive, maybe?
Right. It really makes you think. And it wasn't just one place, was it? These threads were emerging elsewhere, too.
Oh, absolutely. If we look at India, for instance, the Vedas, these ancient texts, going back to around 1500 BCE, they mention dhyana, which was a core concept focused on achieving spiritual enlightenment through meditative practices.
Okay, so very spiritual focus initially.
Very much so. Then, of course, you have Buddhism in the 6th century BCE. Siddhartha Gautama.
The Buddha.
Right. He really formalized meditation, developing practices like Vipassana.
Which is insight meditation?
Exactly. Insight. And Samatha, which is more about cultivating calm abiding.
Calm abiding, okay.
And these are really foundational practices. They still influence so much meditation today. It's interesting how these different approaches arose, in distinct philosophical contexts, all aimed at understanding reality, alleviating suffering.
But it wasn't just India, right? You mentioned other places. What about, say, China or the Middle East?
Good question. Yeah, in China, Taoism gave rise to practices like Qigong and Tai Chi.
Which involve movement, don't they?
They do, but there's a strong meditative component.
Yeah.
The focus is on cultivating and balancing the body's energy, Qi, and aligning with nature. A bit different.
Okay, and the Middle East?
Their Islamic Sufism developed
Dhikr.
It's a powerful meditative practice, often involves chanting God's names, aiming to foster a deeper spiritual connection.
So again, different cultures, different expressions.
But that similar core idea, right? Focused awareness, often linked to these bigger ideas of self, the cosmos, the divine.
It's so easy, though, to think of meditation as purely an Eastern thing. But you're saying the West had its own contemplative traditions, too.
That's a really important point, yeah. Maybe not always as systematically codified early on, but definitely present.
Like what?
Well, Christian Lectio Divina. It's a method of prayer and scriptural reading, but with a big focus on contemplation.
Okay.
And Jewish Hitbodedut. That's more about solitary contemplation, reflection.
Huh. I hadn't heard of those in this context.
And the word itself, meditation, comes from the Latin meditatio. Originally, it just meant to ponder or to reflect deeply.
So the idea of focused thought was always there in the West, too.
It was, though the aims and methods sometimes differed from the East. Maybe less emphasis initially on, say, emptying the mind, more on contemplation of something.
Interesting distinction. Okay, so we've got these ancient roots kind of spread out. How did it make the jump, from these localized spiritual practices to the global thing we see now? How did that spread start?
Well, the initial spread was pretty gradual, often following trade routes. Think the Silk Road, starting around the 5th or 6th century BCE.
Ah, the Silk Road. Makes sense.
That helped move Buddhist practices eastward into China, eventually other parts of Asia. But the real turning point for significant Western exposure, that came much later.
When was that?
We're talking the 19th century. Increased global travel, more cultural exchange. Things started opening up.
And that leads us to that pivotal moment you mentioned earlier, Chicago, 1893, the World Parliament of Religions.
Precisely. That event was just groundbreaking.
Why was it such a big deal?
Because it was one of the first times Eastern spiritual leaders could directly introduce their traditions to a big Western audience on a major stage.
Right.
Figures like Swami Vivekananda, he was crucial. He presented Hindu philosophy, meditation practices.
And people listened.
Oh, yeah. It sparked considerable interest, both intellectually and spiritually. It really laid the groundwork for what came later.
Then the 20th century hits, and things really accelerate, right? Especially with transcendental meditation, TM.
Yes, the 1960s were huge for that. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi popularized TM.
And the Beatles got involved.
Famously. Their endorsement brought meditation right into mainstream Western culture in a way nothing had before.
But was it still seen as purely spiritual then?
That's where the shift happens. It started being framed differently, not just spiritual, but also as a tool.
A tool for what?
Stress reduction, personal growth. It tapped into that growing Western interest in self-improvement, well-being.
Ah, okay. The secular angle starts emerging.
Exactly. And we also started seeing the beginnings of scientific interest. Researchers like B.K. Anand documenting actual physiological changes in experienced meditators like yogis.
Adding that layer of scientific credibility.
Right, which made it more palatable for some.
This leads us to a really interesting development. How these ancient practices got adapted for the modern world. Mindfulness meditation is probably the biggest example, right?
Absolutely huge.
How did that evolve from its Buddhist roots into what we see everywhere now?
Well, mindfulness meditation draws its core principles directly from Buddhist vipassana, that insight practice, observing the present moment. But it's been skillfully secularized, made applicable in psychology, therapy, healthcare.
And John Kabat-Zinn was key there.
Transformative. His work in the 1970s developing mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, that was a game changer.
Why MBSR specifically?
Because it offered a structured, standardized 8-week program. It used mindfulness specifically to help people manage stress, anxiety, chronic pain, but in a completely non-religious context.
So it was evidence-based from the start.
That was the goal. And it was resonated with the medical and scientific communities. It really paved the way for integration into healthcare.
And then came other therapies based on it.
Right, like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. That combines mindfulness with cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, particularly helpful for preventing relapse in depression.
So it's moved beyond just general well-being into specific clinical applications.
Definitely.
And it's not just therapy anymore, is it? We're seeing meditation pop up in schools now.
That's right. It's a growing trend.
What does that look like? Are kids actually meditating in class?
Sometimes, yes. Or there are initiatives like the Mindful Moment Room, had a school in Baltimore, Robert W. Coleman Elementary.
A mindful moment room.
Yeah, basically a quiet space where students can go to practice mindfulness techniques. It's used as an alternative to traditional disciplines sometimes.
Interesting. What's the thinking behind putting this in schools?
Well, the idea, backed by emerging research, is that these practices can help kids develop greater self-awareness, emotional regulation.
Skills they definitely need.
Especially today. Research suggests it can improve focus, reduce anxiety, particularly for students dealing with a lot of stress or trauma.
It makes sense. And then there's the corporate world. I mean, can you imagine those ancient monks predicting Google employees taking mindfulness breaks?
It's quite the image, isn't it?
What's driving that corporate adoption? Is it just trendy, or are there real benefits they're seeing?
I think it's moving beyond just trendiness. Companies like Google, Nike, tons of others, they're offering these programs because they see potential tangible benefits.
Like what? Better productivity.
That's part of the hope. But also employee well-being, resilience, maybe even creativity. A study back in 2018 showed Headspace users reporting significant stress reduction after just 10 days.
10 days, that's fast.
And even more over longer periods. Plus, things like virtual mindfulness classes make it super accessible now, even for remote teams. They're tools for managing stress and focus in demanding jobs.
In technology, you mentioned Headspace. Tech has played a massive role in this explosion, hasn't it?
Undeniably. A huge role.
How has it reshaped things?
Well, the apps, like Headspace and Calm, are the obvious example. They've put guided meditations literally in millions of pockets.
Lowering the barrier to entry massively.
Totally. And then you have newer things like biofeedback devices, the Muse headband, for instance.
What does that do?
It senses your brain activity using EEG sensors and gives you real-time audio feedback, like sounds of weather changing to help guide your meditation. More calm, calmer weather sounds.
Huh. So a more data-driven approach for some people.
Exactly. These innovations have really democratized meditation, broken down barriers of location, cost, maybe even cultural background. You don't need a guru nearby anymore.
Though that raises its own questions, I suppose.
It does. About authenticity, depth, the role of tech in something traditionally very analog. Good questions.
Now, it's fascinating how these core practices have sort of adapted and taken on different flavors. Our sources gave a good overview of these cultural variations. Can you maybe highlight some key differences?
Yeah, it's really insightful how the basic principles, focus, awareness stay, but the techniques and goals shift.
Okay.
So in Hinduism, you have dhyana and yoga, traditionally aimed at spiritual enlightenment. Now, they're part of the global yoga movement, sure, but also secularized for fitness, stress relief.
Right. Yoga studios everywhere.
Exactly. Buddhism, Vipassana, Zen, metta, or loving kindness focused on insight, discipline, compassion. That's given rise to the whole secular mindfulness movement in the West.
Which we just talked about.
Right, but those practices also continue very traditionally in monasteries, Zen retreats globally.
Okay, what about Taoism? Qigong, Tai Chi.
Their focus is more on energy balance. Qi, harmony with nature. Very popular in wellness circles now, often adapted specifically for physical health benefits like balance for seniors.
Makes sense. And Sufism, the Dhikr chanting.
Traditionally for divine connection. Interestingly, some Western Sufi orders now frame it more in terms of universal spirituality, less tied to specific Islamic theology for wider appeal.
And the Western traditions we mentioned earlier, Lectio Divina, Hit Bodhidhat.
They're seeing a revival. Christian centering prayer, Jewish mindfulness programs. They're integrating these contemplative roots, sometimes finding common ground with modern mindfulness too.
So lots of blending and adapting happening.
Constant evolution.
And is there a general sort of East-West difference in the primary focus of modern meditation?
Generally speaking, yeah, you could say that. In the West, the emphasis, especially in the mainstream, often leans secular.
Mental health benefits, stress reduction, focus.
Exactly, tangible well-being outcomes. Whereas many Eastern practices, even when acknowledging those benefits, often retain a stronger spiritual core enlightenment, self-transcendence, connection to the divine. That's still central.
But it's not a hard and fast rule.
Definitely not. Lots of Westerners explore the spiritual depths, and Eastern traditions sometimes frame things in terms of well-being. It's more a difference in emphasis, perhaps, in the mainstream adaptations.
Okay. So with all this spread, all this adaptation, what's the overall global impact we're actually seeing across different areas?
I'd say the impact is pretty significant, and it's multifaceted.
Mental health, for starters?
Clearly. Research consistently points to meditation being effective for reducing stress, anxiety, depression symptoms. Some studies even suggest MBSR can be comparable to antidepressants for certain conditions.
That's quite a claim.
It is, but the evidence is growing. Then education, like we touched on. Mindfulness programs seem to be improving student outcomes, especially in really stressful environments.
And the workplace.
Increasingly recognized for enhancing employee resilience, maybe creativity, overall well-being, contributing to healthier, maybe more productive organizations.
And technology just keeps amplifying all this.
Absolutely. Making it accessible to so many more people, so much more easily. Events like World Meditation Day, May 21st, they really highlight this global reach now.
It's even in standard healthcare, isn't it?
Increasingly.
Yeah.
Especially during crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, it was offered widely as a coping tool. It shows its versatility, its relevance.
But it can't all be smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
With this massive globalization and secularization, are there criticisms, controversies?
Oh, definitely. There are significant concerns being raised.
Like what?
Cultural appropriation is a big one. The risk that these secular adaptations strip the practices from deep spiritual roots and ethical contexts.
Just taking the technique without the foundation.
That's the worry for some. Then there's commercialization.
The apps, the studios, the celebrity gurus.
Right. Concerns about monetizing something traditionally offered freely as part of a spiritual path, turning mindfulness into just another wellness commodity.
Yeah, I can see that.
And also, while generally safe, some studies are starting to look at potential adverse effects. It's not necessarily a universal positive for absolutely everyone in every context. Sometimes it might bring up difficult emotions or experiences, especially without proper guidance.
So it's not a magic bullet. Needs careful consideration.
Nuance is important, yes.
Okay, looking ahead then, based on everything we've discussed, what do you see as the future directions? Where is meditation heading?
It looks like it will continue to be dynamic. We'll definitely see ongoing research, probably using more advanced neuroimaging.
Seeing what's actually happening in the brain.
Exactly. Deepening our understanding of how it works, which could lead to more targeted, maybe even personalized applications.
Tailoring meditation like medicine.
Potentially, down the line. We'll likely see further integration into more fields, healthcare, education, sports, arts.
But what about those concerns? The appropriation, the spiritual roots?
That's going to be a key ongoing dialogue. Balancing the benefits of secular applications with respect for and understanding of the rich spiritual heritages. That's crucial.
How does that happen?
More dialogue with traditional communities, perhaps, ensuring cultural sensitivity, maybe developing more sophisticated personalized tech that adapts, but also maybe guides people towards deeper understanding if they seek it.
So it's still evolving.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's not static. It's a living tradition adapting to our modern world, our technology, our needs.
So what does this all mean?
It suggests meditation isn't just one thing. It's this incredibly diverse set of practices with deep roots that continue to adapt and find relevance today.
Right. So to sum it all up then, meditation has taken this absolutely incredible journey from ancient spiritual practices in various corners of the world
Thousands of years ago.
to becoming this incredibly diverse and widespread tool, really, in our modern world. It's adapted to fit all sorts of cultural needs, secular needs.
Constantly changing shape.
And it's making a real impact, isn't it? On mental health, in our schools, even in the workplace.
The effects seem quite widespread now.
While also acknowledging those ongoing challenges. Cultural sensitivity, commercialization, things we need to keep talking about.
Definitely. Important conversations to have.
So, thinking about this vast history, all these different forms meditation takes today, what does it mean for your understanding of focus, awareness, and well-being? That's maybe something to reflect on.
A good takeaway question.
Yeah. Perhaps exploring some of the specific traditions we touched on, or maybe trying one of the modern applications. That could be a fascinating next step in your own learning journey.